Joining me now is Jeff Immelt, a venture partner at New Enterprise Associates and the former CEO of General Electric. His memoir titled Hot Seat, What I Learned Leading a Great American Company, came out this year, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about it. Jeff, thanks so much for joining us today. Our topic, and I was so intrigued reading your book. I don't know any other CEO who took his job the day before 9/11 occurred. I didn't know that. In the many times we've talked in the past, I didn't know that was part of your origin story as CEO. What a shock. And then the 2008, 2009 financial crisis. But when you came into that, you took over a huge ship. And yet you made sustainability and wind and, transition and gas and, what we called Ecomagination a big part of changing and moving that ship. And I'd love to hear what that was like, because it's hard to move a big ship in a direction that it's not used to going.
Steve, one of the advantages of a conglomerate is that you can look across different businesses to pick up, kind of common themes, if you will. And in 2003 and 2004, you could see energy efficiency really becoming very relevant across appliances and jet engines and gas turbines. And so we could see kind of the way the waves were breaking. I was fortunate to work with a lot of smart people. So I was able myself to go to school on climate change and try to understand where the science was and develop a point of view. And the last thing is we are, because we're a big company, not unlike many others, we're able to see where policy was, what was the state of play in DC. And all those things kind of came together with the notion that as early as 2005, that the company could really help lead a clean tech initiative across multiple divisions, multiple regions, which we called Ecomagination. And we kind of built it as a business model, not as a separate initiative. So we had this notion, Steve, that green was green, that we could solve problems and make money at the same time. And I think that turned out to be kind of the way the world broke, right, over the subsequent 15 years.
Right.
So sometimes being big is a disadvantage. In this case, being big and complicated was an advantage because it allowed us to see things others couldn't see.
Let me ask you just a notch further. One of the parts of the book I really enjoyed much about. I enjoyed your candor, number one, but as you went through it and you were talking about going this direction, you talked about Barbara Comstock, your chief marketing officer, and you being the only two that had any confidence in this Ecomagination plan. And I know that you're CEO, I know that you have power, but you didn't have absolute power. You had to bring your board on, you had to bring on division chiefs. And so from a systems perspective, how did you seduce that system to move where you and Barbara Comstock wanted to go?
Yeah, so Steve, we were an old company, right? We're a 100-year-old company, and we had Superfund sites, right? So a lot of us had grown up in a GE where we were being accused of putting PCBs in the Hudson River and things like that. And so that was the background we had, was that environmentalists were our enemy and that we had to defend ourselves. And I tried to break into that paradigm. And again, to your point, some of it was, the original vote was like 28-2, with Beth and I being the only people in favor. But some of it's just education. I remember having a big management conference at the end of 2004, and I brought Jeffrey Sachs in to be a speaker, right? And people didn't really know. I didn't really know who Jeffrey was, but he's articulate, he's smart. We had our executives, we had utility executives. And at the end of the session, I kind of stood back and facilitated discussion, but, he just was overwhelmingly persuasive that this was coming our way. So some of it is maybe tops down, but a lot of it is just education and thought leadership and letting it sink in. And then I'd say the last aspect was, look, we're a global company. And so we had big enterprises in Europe and places that really took the environment in those days anyhow more seriously. And I think that played to our favor as well. But look, none of this stuff happens unless the leader is hands-on, walks the talk, invests money, and you can see the actions taking place.
One of the other things I found interesting, I mean, GE or any of these large companies is really the size of a country, and you made investment in science and tech a real priority. And in fact, I didn't know until I read your book how much technology is built into wind. I didn't understand the dimensions of wind, the nature of the blades, the turbines, all the things that kind of go into wind. But as you kind of invest in it today, I'll just ask you a question about reinventing America for a minute with, President Biden. I've long said if you want to compete with China, invest in the National Science Foundation. And now they've come out with a plan. They're talking about even upwards of $100 billion going to the NSF to move around in the science portfolio, whereas today their budget's only $9 billion, would be a huge jump. I'd love to get your thoughts on what the country needs to do by way of what, some of what you were doing at General Electric on investing in science and tech and what some of the lessons learned there are.
Stephen, clean tech, which is the subject of your conference, look, it's not about platitudes and things like that. You really need coherence between public policy, the capital markets, and innovation. And you need it over an extremely long time horizon, right, in order to make that happen. And all of those in the current American context is challenged. But being able to make long-term technical bets is clearly part of it, whether it's in sequestration or battery technology or next generation nuclear. And to a certain extent, the government is the only entity that can have a time horizon and a risk profile that can make that happen. Look, there's a nuclear industry today that's 25% of the world's installed base of power. It only exists because the US government wanted it to happen in the 1950s and 60s. Only. That's the only reason. So we have to have that kind of time horizon and risk profile if we really want to move the needle on clean tech, on really addressing climate change. And I think when it comes to national labs, I think industries you want to own are going to be ones like battery technology, sequestration, next generation nuclear. It's not a long list. It's probably 5 or 6 key technologies that are really going to be those that kind of come to fore in the 2030 to 2050 time period. So I think the country, from a technical standpoint, has a role to play. Look, there's all this ESG investing today, Steve, but investors really don't want to they don't have the same risk profile that's needed to really solve this problem that's going to be multi-decade, multi-technology, multi-region. Capital markets investors, they talk a good game, but they're not going to be there when you need the big capital that's high risk.
Just to sneak a little question in here about what's possible. I just flew back from Hawaii. I was on a plane. I was on United Airlines, one of your kind of clients with Boeing planes and whatnot. Sure. And the new CEO of United said, hey, we have to take climate seriously, and we as a company need to take it seriously, which means by 2050, United Airlines is going to be completely green, carbon zero, and that they have to make strides in biofuels and strides in carbon sequestration. You're one of these people that understands, even though we may not have all the technology today, on what's achievable. Is carbon sequestration at scale achievable? Or is a biofuels, fueling airline transport achievable, given, as all the componentry that goes in to that form of transportation platform?
Yeah, different elements. Let's say carbon sequestration. Again, something that people should realize is that 7% of the U.S.'s power generation is renewables. 93% is either nuclear or hydrocarbons, most of it hydrocarbons, right? And that's not going to change in a year or 2 or 3. So we need to have technologies like carbon sequestration, more energy efficiency in order to take us where we need to go. We have to do something about the installed base, and that's where there's a lot of naivete. So right now, it's still lab scale. It's still too high cost. But I see technologies that can take some of the cost out, whether it's in material science or the way that the whole energy process takes place. And I think those are some of the things that need to be, when you talk about government programs, I would put sequestration pretty close to the top of the list in terms of something that needs to be really developed and driven. Biofuels exist today. They're high cost, but again, costs can come down on those at scale. So, when we're looking at pilot plants, it's hard to judge the cost, but a lot of these technologies can be developed if they're done at scale. That's the story of wind. Look, when we first invested in wind, it was 25 cents a kilowatt hour. Now it's 3 cents a kilowatt hour, right? It was subscale. It was poor manufacturing. Now it's scale based. It's bigger manufacturers, and that took place over 20 years. So a lot of this is possible, but you have to start now. It takes time.
You know, I want to tell my audience right now, please read Hot Seat. It's a fascinating, your journey through being CEO of GE. I could feel your passion for projects in it. I could also feel a lot of your pain when you were in this book, in the story, the way you told the story. But I love the questions that you pose to some of your successors, or possible successors that might come along. And also the kind of the challenges that other people in position you had. So I want to ask you that kind of question. If you could pick one business today that you didn't invest in when you were CEO of GE that you wish you had or that you could today, what would it be?
Oh gosh, I'm going to make it really relevant to your audience. I would say I wish we had taken a bigger bite in battery technology, partnered with one of the big automotive companies, and done it 15 years ago. We made an effort. We tried to go it alone. We tried to build around locomotives. It was the wrong space, the wrong technology. But I think that's a seminal technology that's going to be very relevant. You can't get there. You couldn't get there without being in the kind of in the automotive space. But that's one for sure. Solar, Steve. Solar's a business where none of the product people make money. All the money's made in project finance. So that's a different kettle of fish. But batteries are one that really was a great GE business that we basically gave up too soon.
That's fascinating. Let me just say, just in conclusion, I was also taken with some of the people you went to school with, Harvard Business School. You were at school with Jamie Dimon, and I think if I read it right, you introduced Jamie Dimon to his wife. Well, Jamie Dimon has just come out with a letter to his stockholders and really a letter to the public. It's a very extensive, long letter. It's sort of a state of the world from his perch. And he's much more positive than I had heard Jamie Dimon be about the fundamental strengths of the country, getting through the COVID crisis as we have. Your book references the COVID crisis among a number of crises that GE and you had to deal with, and now GE as an entity is having to deal with that. I'd love to get your take. You know Jamie Dimon well. Do you agree with him? Do you have largely that same sense? And from a national perspective, do you think we're going to be able to move out of this era of toxicity, to something more constructive and productive for the country?
Look, I would say we have to take some confidence from navigating the COVID crisis, at least economically. Lots of people coming back to work. Most companies have made it through. I think particularly where Jamie sits, in 2008 and 2009, the banks were the enemy. I'd say the banks have been a pillar of strength during COVID. So I think that's fantastic. So I'd put that all on the good part of the ledger. I think, Steve, look, I think climate change is real. It's caused by man. It's existential, but it's complicated and hard. And in today's environment, unless we change, we're not going to solve this problem. So I would really love to see President Biden take the time to build a real coalition around the work that needs to be done to solve this. And that means both bringing the oil industry with him, but also forging forward to these next generation of technologies, whether it's fission or other sequestration or things like that. And it means having a relationship with China. So on the negative part of the ledger, I think we've got to start solving problems. Climate change is a big one to solve. Let's go to work on that and bring people with us. And the fact of the matter is that if your subject is climate change and wanting to solve it, China's probably more important than the U.S. in the next 20 or 30 or 40 years. We need a relationship with China to solve this problem. So I view those as challenges to be solved, but lots of us are ready to go to work on them.
Well, Jeff Immelt, former chairman and CEO of GE and author of Hot Seat, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us today.
Great, Steve. Thanks.
That brings us to the end of our mammoth multi-day event on sustainability. A big thank you to our sponsors, the American Investment Council, the American Petroleum Institute, Consumer Brands Association, Xylem, Electric Last Mile Solutions, XL Fleet, and SAFE, which is securing America's future energy. We needed you all. Thank you for supporting our conversations. And our deep appreciation to all of you who tuned in for the last 3 days of these conversations. We hope you found it useful and enjoyable. And for those of you who missed any of the sessions, head over to our website, thehill.com/events to get caught up. I'm Steve Clemons. Be well.